A millionaire forces his daughter to marry a humble farmer and discovers a secret that could destroy his family. The sound of the crystal shattering against the wall echoed through the Montgomery mansion in Savannah, Georgia. Sophia stood motionless, watching the shards scatter across the oak floor as her father, Richard Montgomery, stared at her with icy eyes from behind his mahogany desk. "Enough. You've crossed every possible line," Richard vociferated, the veins in his neck pulsing. "First, you dropped out of law school. Then that ridiculous story about wanting to be a photographer. Now this? A scandal with a married man?" Sophia took a deep breath, her fingers gripping the edge of the Victorian chair. "I didn't know he was married, Dad, and I broke it off as soon as I found out. It doesn't matter. The damage to our reputation is done." Richard stood up, his imposing figure casting a shadow over his daughter. "The Montgomerys have had a tradition in this town for 5 generations. I won't allow you to destroy all that with your adolescent whims." "I'm 28, Dad. I'm not a teenager anymore," Sophia protested, her voice trembling slightly. "Then start acting like an adult." Richard walked over to the window, overlooking the estate's immaculate gardens. "That's why I've made a decision. You're getting married." The air escaped Sophia's lungs as if she had been punched. "What? Noah Anderson? I met him a few weeks ago. He owns a promising farm in Walterboro, South Carolina. A decent, hardworking guy. Are you crazy? You can't force me to get married." Richard turned around slowly. "I can and I will. Either you marry Noah, or you're disinherited. No money, no house, no Montgomery surname." His words hit her like sharp blades. Sophia knew her father well enough to know that it wasn't a bluff. In his 60 years, Richard Montgomery had never gone back on a decision. 150 kilometers away, on a farm on the outskirts of Walterboro, Noah Anderson wiped the sweat from his brow as he examined his organic cotton plantation. At 32, he had managed to turn the land inherited from his adoptive parents into a thriving, sustainable business. His cell phone vibrated in his pocket. It was a message from Richard Montgomery. Noah was still trying to process the surreal proposal the businessman had made weeks earlier. An arranged marriage to his daughter in exchange for a substantial investment in the farm. Noah had never imagined himself in a marriage of convenience. But the recent droughts had been devastating, and the farm was in desperate need of modernization. Besides, something about Richard intrigued him deeply. There was an inexplicable familiarity about the businessman that disturbed him. The truth that Noah had carried with him since the age of 18, when his adoptive mother, Margaret, revealed on her deathbed that he had been adopted, weighed more and more heavily. All she knew was that his birth mother, a young woman called Clara Matthews, had given him up for adoption in Augusta, Georgia. 2 weeks later, Sophia found herself sitting in front of her dressing table mirror, watching her makeup artist work on her face for the engagement dinner. Her hands were shaking slightly as she held the champagne glass. "Darling, you look beautiful," said Eleanor Montgomery, her mother, adjusting the pearl necklace around her daughter's neck. There was concern in her blue eyes. "Are you sure about this? Have I ever had a choice in Dad's decisions?" Sophia replied bitterly. The engagement dinner was organized at the historic Wentworth Mansion, where Savannah's high society gathered to celebrate the union. Noah, in his well-cut suit, seemed out of place among the sophisticated guests, but there was a dignity in his simple manner that didn't go unnoticed. During dinner, sitting side by side, Sophia and Noah barely exchanged words. She noticed his calloused hands, his green eyes that seemed to carry a familiar sadness, the way he occasionally ran his hand through his wavy brown hair, a gesture that was strangely reminiscent of his father. "You'll have 3 months to get to know each other before the wedding," Richard announced, raising his glass in a toast. "Noah will spend more time in Savannah, so you can bond." Sophia looked at her reflection in the champagne glass, wondering how her life had gotten to this point. Next to her, Noah seemed equally lost in thought, his fingers playing nervously with his napkin. What neither of them knew was that Eleanor Montgomery held a secret that could destroy everything. Sitting at the table, she watched Noah with a look of horrified recognition. Those green eyes, the shape of his face, his gestures, they were identical to Richard's when he was young. 32 years earlier, Eleanor had found out about Richard's affair with Clara Matthews, a young secretary at his company. Clara had become pregnant and mysteriously disappeared. Richard swore that he had taken care of the situation, and Eleanor, determined to save her marriage, chose to believe that the baby had never been born. Now, sitting in that elegant salon, Eleanor felt the weight of 3 decades of secrets threatening to surface. Her husband was unknowingly forcing his daughter to marry her own half-brother. The night advanced, and with it, a storm formed on the savannah horizon, like a harbinger of the maelstrom to come. Sophia and Noah, trapped in an agreement that neither of them wanted, had no idea that their destinies were bound together by ties much deeper and more disturbing than a simple marriage contract. Eleanor Montgomery couldn't sleep that night. Sitting in her favorite armchair in the solarium, she watched the rain lashing the windows as her mind obsessively relived every detail of the engagement dinner. The way Noah held his fork, the way he tilted his head when he smiled, they were such familiar gestures that they seemed like a cruel joke of fate. "Mrs. Montgomery?" The voice of Martha, the housekeeper who had served the family for 3 decades, interrupted his thoughts. "I've brought your chamomile tea." Eleanor accepted the cup with trembling hands. "Martha, do you remember Clara Matthews?" The housekeeper stiffened visibly. "Mr. Montgomery's secretary? The one who—" "Yes, that's the one." Eleanor stared at the golden liquid in her cup. "Did you ever meet her in person?" "A few times, when she came to bring documents." Martha hesitated. She was a pretty girl. Green eyes like Noah Anderson's, Eleanor added, her voice barely above a whisper. Across town, in her apartment in the historic Forsyth Park district, Sophia tossed and turned in her king-size bed, unable to find comfort. Her cell phone vibrated with a message from Noah. "Can we meet tomorrow? We need to talk." The message took her by surprise. During dinner, they had barely exchanged words beyond the necessary formalities. Sophia responded by agreeing to meet at Forsyth Park at 10 a.m. The next morning, the air was still heavy with humidity from the night storm when Sophia spotted Noah sitting on one of the park benches. He was wearing jeans and a plain blue shirt, looking much more at ease than he had in his suit the night before. "Thanks for coming," Noah said, getting up. "I thought we needed to have an honest chat, just the two of us." They walked side by side along paths shaded by centuries-old oak trees covered in Spanish moss. "You don't want this wedding as much as I do," Sophia began. "No," Noah admitted. "But I need to be honest with you. Your family. There's something about them that intrigues me, especially your father." Sophia stopped walking. "What do you mean?" "It's hard to explain." Noah ran his hand through his hair, that gesture that reminded him so much of Richard. "When I met him, I felt a strange connection, as if I already knew him from somewhere." Meanwhile, at the Montgomery mansion, Eleanor was frantically rummaging through her private closet, looking for an old shoebox where she kept memories she'd rather forget. At the bottom of the box, she found what she was looking for: a yellowed photo of Clara Matthews at a corporate picnic in 1990. His hands trembled as he held the photograph. Clara was smiling at the camera, her green eyes shining with youth and hope, the same eyes that now haunted Eleanor through Noah's face. Richard entered the room unannounced, finding his wife sitting on the floor of the closet with the photo in her hands. "What are you doing?" Eleanor couldn't hold back her tears. "Richard, we need to talk about Clara Matthews." Richard's face paled. "Why are you digging this up now?" "Because I think Noah Anderson is your son." The silence that followed was deafening. Richard staggered to the edge of the bed, his legs seemingly unable to support him. "Impossible. Clara assured me she'd had an abortion." "Look at him, Richard. Really look." Eleanor threw Clara's photo in her husband's direction. "He's a copy of her when she was young. The same gestures, the same smile." In the park, oblivious to the storm brewing at the Montgomery mansion, Sophia and Noah continued their walk. "My adoptive parents died a few years ago," Noah explained. "Before she passed away, my mother told me about the adoption. All I know is that my birth mother's name was Clara Matthews." The name struck Sophia like a thunderbolt. She had heard this name before, whispered in conversations abruptly interrupted when she entered a room, mentioned in heated arguments between her parents in the early hours of the morning. "Clara Matthews?" Sophia repeated, feeling an inexplicable chill run down her spine. Are you sure? Absolutely. Why? Does that name mean something to you? Before Sophia could answer, her cell phone rang. It was her mother, her voice broken with crying. Sophia, you need to come home immediately. It's urgent. The sky was beginning to darken again over Savannah, as if nature itself was anticipating the storm of revelations that was about to descend on the Montgomery family. Noah and Sophia said goodbye quickly, each going their separate ways, still unaware that their lives were about to intertwine in a way that neither of them could have imagined. In the Montgomery mansion, Eleanor held a letter yellowed by time, the last communication from Clara Matthews, dated 32 years ago. Richard was sitting in his armchair, his face buried in his hands, while Sophia's footsteps echoed through the doorway, announcing her arrival for a moment that would forever change the fate of everyone involved. Sophia walked through the heavy oak doors of the Montgomery mansion with her heart racing. The muffled sounds of an argument coming from her father's study guided her through the hallway. When she entered the room, the scene she encountered left her paralyzed. Her mother was sobbing in an armchair, clutching yellowed papers, while her father remained motionless, staring into the void. What's going on? Sophia asked, her voice trembling. Eleanor raised her red eyes to her daughter. Darling, sit down. There's something we need to tell you. Richard finally moved, pouring himself a generous shot of whiskey. This is madness, Eleanor. We can't. Can't what? Sophia interrupted, anxiety growing in her chest. Does this have something to do with Noah? With Clara Matthews? Richard's glass slipped from his fingers, shattering on the floor. How do you know that name? Noah told me today. He said she's his biological mother. Sophia looked from one father to the other, trying to decipher their devastated expressions. What aren't you telling me? Eleanor stood up with difficulty, approaching her daughter. Clara Matthews was your father's secretary in 1990. They had an affair. The world seemed to spin around Sophia. The pieces of the puzzle began to fit together in a horrifying way. No, she whispered. It can't be. Noah is my son, Richard admitted, his voice breaking. Your half-brother. The scream that escaped Sophia's throat echoed through the mansion. Martha, the housekeeper, who was in the hallway, dropped the tea tray she was carrying. You were going to make me marry my own brother? Sophia screamed, tears streaming down her face. How could you? We didn't know. Eleanor tried to approach her daughter, who backed away. Clara said she'd had an abortion. Richard believed her. At his farm in Walterboro, Noah was going over some documents when his cell phone vibrated. It was a message from Sophia. I need to see you. Now. It's urgent. Worried by the tone of the message, Noah grabbed his keys and left immediately for Savannah. During the journey, his mind wandered to the strange connection he had felt with Richard Montgomery since their first meeting. Now, that feeling made even less sense. Meanwhile, at the mansion, Richard was frantically rummaging through his office, looking for an envelope he had kept decades ago. Here, he said, finally finding a yellowed package. Clara's last letter. Eleanor took the letter with trembling hands and began to read aloud. Dear Richard, by the time you read this, I'll be long gone. I lied about the abortion. I couldn't do it. Our son deserves a chance at life, even if it's far away from us. I found a wonderful family who will raise him with all the love he deserves. Please don't look for me. Love, Clara. Sophia listened in shock, sitting on the leather sofa. Where is Clara now? She died 5 years ago, Richard replied, his voice breaking. I found out by chance, reading the obituary in Augusta's newspaper. The sound of tires on the driveway announced Noah's arrival. Sophia ran out onto the porch, leaving her parents behind. When Noah got out of the car, she couldn't hold back her tears. What happened? Noah asked, worried, approaching her. Don't come any closer, Sophia shouted, raising her hands like an invisible barrier. You're my father's son. Noah stood motionless, the words hitting him like a punch in the gut. What? Richard and Eleanor appeared on the balcony. Seeing Richard, Noah felt that familiar sense of connection, now charged with a new and terrible meaning. Clara Matthews, Richard said, his voice trembling. I loved her once, a long time ago. Noah staggered backwards, leaning on his car. You're my father? The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by the distant sound of thunder, heralding yet another approaching storm. The four people on the veranda of the Montgomery mansion remained motionless, each processing the devastating weight of the truth that had just come to light. All these years, Noah finally spoke, his voice heavy with emotion. I've searched for answers about my origins, and now, he looked at Sophia, the horror of the situation reflected in his eyes. My God, son, Richard stepped forward, but Noah stepped back. Don't call me that. Noah shouted. You don't have the right. Not after 32 years. The first drops of rain began to fall, but no one moved. The world seemed to have stopped at that moment, as four shattered lives tried to understand how to move forward under the weight of that revelation. The rain fell mercilessly on the Montgomery mansion as Noah drove back to Walterboro in a daze. His hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly that his knuckles were white, his mind obsessively replaying every moment of that surreal afternoon. Sophia, his almost fiancée, now revealed as his half-sister, her sobs still echoed in his ears. At the mansion, Sophia locked herself in her room, ignoring Eleanor's pleas through the door. Sitting on the floor, leaning against the bed, she frantically leafed through an old photo album she had retrieved from the attic. She was looking for any trace of Clara Matthews, any clue that she might have missed over the years. Sophia, please, Eleanor begged from the other side of the door. We need to talk. Talk? Sophia shouted back. How can you even look at each other after that? In the office, Richard was pouring his third shot of whiskey when Martha entered without knocking, something she had never done in 30 years of service. Mr. Montgomery, she said, her voice steady despite the trembling in her hands. There's something I need to confess? Richard raised his red eyes. Not now, Martha. It's about Clara Matthews. Martha took a deep breath. I helped her when she left Savannah. I was the one who connected her with the Andersons in Walterboro. The glass of whiskey slipped out of Richard's hands again. You what? Clara was desperate. My cousin Rose Anderson and her husband couldn't have children. It was the only solution we could find. In Walterboro, Noah parked his truck in front of the small Methodist church where his adoptive parents were buried. In the rain, he knelt between the graves of Rose and John Anderson. Why didn't they ever tell me the whole truth? He whispered, his tears mixing with the rainwater. Why did they let me find out like this? Her cell phone vibrated incessantly in her pocket. Calls from Richard, messages from Eleanor, even a few texts from Sophia. He ignored them all. How could she face any of them now? The next morning, Sophia woke up with swollen eyes to find an envelope under her door. Inside, a letter from Martha. Dear Sophia, what I'm about to tell you should have been revealed a long time ago. I was complicit in keeping it a secret, and now I see what it cost you all. Clara Matthews was more than a secretary who had an affair with her father. She was a brilliant young woman who fell in love with the wrong man at the wrong time. The letter went on for several pages, detailing how Martha had witnessed the relationship between Clara and Richard, how she had helped Clara escape when Eleanor discovered her pregnancy, and how she had kept in touch with her over the years through her cousin Rose Anderson. In his apartment in Charleston, where he had driven to in the early hours of the morning, Noah found an old box in the back of his closet. Inside were letters and photos that Rose had kept her secret correspondence with Clara Matthews. In one of the photos, yellowed by time, Clara was holding a baby herself in front of a hospital in Augusta. His phone rang again. It was an unknown number. Noah? Martha's voice shook on the other end of the line. I know you don't know me, but I need to tell you something about your mother. Why should I trust you? Noah asked, his voice hoarse. Because I'm the one who helped your mother find the Andersons. Because I promised her that one day, when it was safe, I would tell her the whole truth. In Savannah, Eleanor faced her own devastating revelations. In her old diary, she found notes about a private investigator she had hired in 1990 to follow Richard. The pages detailed his every encounter with Clara, including visits to a doctor in Augusta. What did you do, Richard? Eleanor confronted her husband in his office. What really happened to Clara? Richard, looking as if he had aged decades in one night, finally broke down. I loved her, Eleanor. When you found out and threatened to take everything from me, I panicked. I gave her money, a lot of money, to disappear and have the abortion, but she didn't. No. And now our children. Richard couldn't finish his sentence. Sophia's phone rang. It was Noah. After a moment's hesitation, she answered. I'm with Martha, he said, his voice charged with emotion. She has all the answers we're looking for. You should come to Charleston. Noah, I don't know if, Sophia, not as that, but as two people who deserve to know the truth about their own lives. Sophia looked out of her bedroom window at the gardens where she used to play as a child, wondering how many other secrets that mansion held. How many lies had been cultivated along with her mother's prize roses? Send me the address, she finally replied. I'll be there in 3 hours. As she drove along I-95 towards Charleston, Sophia thought about how her life had turned into a nightmare in a matter of days. A week ago, her biggest problem was an arranged marriage to a stranger. Now, that same stranger was her stepbrother, and all the foundations of her life had crumbled. The truth, like a relentless storm, continued to descend on the Montgomery family, threatening to sweep away decades of carefully buried secrets. And in Charleston, Martha was preparing to reveal the darkest chapter of that story, a secret that not even Richard knew about. Martha's apartment in Charleston was a small refuge on the 3rd floor of a Victorian building on historic Broad Street. Sophia hesitated for a moment before knocking on the door, her heart hammering against her chest. Noah answered, his red eyes revealing a sleepless night. You came, he said simply, making room for her to enter. Martha was sitting in an old armchair, surrounded by yellowed cardboard boxes and photo albums. Her wrinkled hands held a cup of tea that was shaking slightly. Sit down, please. Martha indicated the sofa. What I'm about to tell you is not easy to hear. Sophia and Noah settled at opposite ends of the sofa, keeping as much distance from each other as possible. The discomfort was palpable in the air. Clara Matthews wasn't just a secretary in love with her boss, Martha began, placing her cup on the table. She was a brilliant woman who discovered something terrible about Richard Montgomery's financial operations. Noah leaned forward. What kind of operations? Money laundering through Montgomery's companies. Clara found documents that proved Richard was involved with dangerous people. Martha took a yellowed envelope from one of the boxes. She kept copies of everything as collateral. Sophia felt her blood run cold in her veins. My father, did he know she had this evidence? Yes, that's why he initially kept her around, trying to find out where the documents were. Their relationship began as a manipulation on his part, but Clara really fell in love. What about the money he gave her to disappear? Noah asked, his voice trembling. It wasn't exactly like that, Martha sighed deeply. Clara discovered she was pregnant around the same time. She found evidence of a murder connected to Richard's business. She fled not only to protect you, Noah, but because she feared for her own life. The silence that followed was deafening. Sophia stood up abruptly, walking over to the window overlooking St. Michael's Church. Why are you telling us this now? She asked, without turning around. Because Clara made me promise to reveal everything when it was safe. And because, Martha hesitated, Richard Montgomery is dying. Noah and Sophia simultaneously turned to face her. Terminal cancer, Martha continued. Eleanor told me last night. He has 6 months at most. Sophia felt her legs weaken and had to lean on the wall. Noah remained motionless, his face a mask of conflicting emotions. There's more. Martha opened another envelope, taking out a letter. Clara wrote this before she died. It was to be given to you, Noah, when the truth came out. With trembling hands, Noah took the letter. The handwriting was delicate but firm. My dear son, if you are reading this, it means that you finally know the truth about your origins. I want you to know that leaving you was the hardest decision I've ever made, but also the most important to keep you alive and safe. Richard Montgomery is not the man he appears to be. The documents I found revealed a corruption scheme that went far beyond simple financial embezzlement. There was blood on his hands. Rose and John Anderson were more than his adopted family, they were his saviors. They helped me disappear when Richard sent people to silence me. Forgive me for not being strong enough to stand up to him. Forgive me for not being present in your life. But know that every decision I made was to protect you. With all my love, Clara." Tears streamed down Noah's face as he finished reading. Sophia had approached, reading over his shoulder, her own vision blurred by emotion. "The documents," Noah finally said. "Where are they?" Martha stood up with difficulty, walking over to a board on the wall. Behind it was a small safe. "Clara entrusted them to me before she left. I've never opened them, but I've kept them safe all these years." When the safe was opened, decades of secrets emerged in the form of yellowed papers, old photos, and bank records. It was enough to destroy not just Richard Montgomery, but the entire empire he had built. "What are we going to do?" Sophia whispered, looking at the evidence of her father's crimes. Noah stood up, carefully tucking his mother's letter into his shirt pocket. "We need to confront him. He owes us the truth before it's too late." "It won't be easy," Martha warned. "Richard Montgomery is a dangerous man, even on the brink of death." "He may be dangerous," Noah replied, a new determination in his voice. "But there are two of us now, and we have something he never had: the truth on our side." Sophia looked at her half-brother, seeing him truly for the first time, not as an unwanted suitor or a family tragedy, but as someone who shared her pain and her search for answers. "Let's go together," she said, holding out her hand to him. Noah hesitated for a moment before accepting the gesture. It was a different touch now, no longer laden with embarrassment, but with a deep, mutual understanding. Martha watched the two of them with tears in her eyes, thinking of Clara and all the lives that had been altered by the Montgomerys' secrets and lies. The coming storm would be devastating, but perhaps it would finally clear the air fouled by decades of secrets. The sun was setting over Savannah as Noah and Sophia left Charleston, Clara's documents carefully tucked away in a briefcase. The drive back was silent, each lost in their own thoughts about the devastating revelations Martha had shared. "I never thought I'd be coming back to confront our father about murder," Sophia broke the silence, her voice trembling slightly at the word hour. Noah gripped the steering wheel tighter. "It's still strange to hear you say, 'our father.' Sorry, I didn't." "No, it's fine. It's the truth, after all." Noah sighed deeply. "How are we going to do this?" "Eleanor needs to be present," Sophia replied after a moment's thought. "She deserves to know everything." When they arrived at the Montgomery mansion, they found Eleanor in the winter garden, her hands shaking as she watered her orchids, a nervous habit Sophia knew well. "Mom," Sophia called softly, "we need to talk. All of us." Eleanor turned, her red eyes widening at the sight of Noah. "You came back?" "Not for him," Noah replied firmly. "For the truth." Richard was in his office, as usual, but something was different. The normally spotless room was a mess, with papers scattered everywhere. He looked like he'd aged a decade in just a few days. "What do you want?" he asked, without lifting his eyes from the documents he was frantically organizing. "The truth, Richard." Noah placed the folder on the table. "All of it." Richard finally looked up, his eyes settling on the folder. "Where did you get it?" "Martha kept everything," Sophia replied, closing the office door. "Clara entrusted it to her before she disappeared." Eleanor, who had followed them, let out a small groan. "Richard, what are they talking about?" "Your husband isn't just a successful businessman, Mother," Sophia continued, her voice trembling. "He's a criminal." Richard stood up abruptly, knocking over some papers. "You don't understand. Everything I've done has been to protect this family, this legacy." "Protect?" Noah opened his briefcase, spreading the documents out on the table. "Doing business with criminals? Laundering money? Ordering," his voice faltered, "ordering people's deaths?" Eleanor staggered, needing to lean on an armchair. "Richard, tell me it's not true." "The Montgomery Empire wasn't built on hard work and determination alone," Richard replied, his voice surprisingly calm. "Sometimes sacrifices have to be made." "Sacrifices?" Sophia shouted. "Like Clara? You tried to silence her when she found out the truth. She was going to destroy everything." Richard slammed the table hard. "Years of work, generations of respect and influence, all because of a nosy secretary who didn't know her place." that nosy secretary was my mother. Noah advanced towards Richard, but Sophia grabbed him by the arm. And you loved her, Eleanor said softly, tears streaming down her face. It wasn't just a manipulation, was it? You really loved her? Richard slumped in his chair, suddenly looking very small and fragile. Yes, he whispered. And that was my biggest mistake. I let feelings get in the way of business. So you decided to kill her? Noah asked, his voice laden with pain. No. Richard raised his eyes, for the first time showing real emotion. I gave her money to disappear, to start again somewhere else. I never knew she was pregnant. When I found out she had compromising documents, others, more dangerous people, decided to take action. But you didn't do anything to stop it, Sophia accused. What could I do? It was too late. Richard coughed violently, spots of blood appearing on the handkerchief he used to cover his mouth. And now, it's too late for me too. Eleanor approached her husband, taking his hand. Why didn't you ever tell me the whole truth? To protect you. To protect Sophia. The less you knew, the safer you'd be. Noah picked up Clara's letter, placing it on the table. She never stopped hiding, you know. Even after all these years, she lived in fear. Is that what you call protection? Richard picked up the letter with trembling hands, his eyes scanning Clara's words. Tears, for the first time in decades, began to stream down his face. Forgive me, he whispered. All of you. I lost control of things a long time ago. Forgiveness isn't something that's easily granted, Noah replied, his voice firm but no longer angry. Especially when it costs so much. Sophia approached her father, observing the man who had always seemed so powerful now reduced to a shadow of his former self. What do we do now? Now, Richard replied, taking a flash drive from a locked drawer, you decide. Here's everything, every transaction, every name, every crime. Enough to destroy not just me, but everyone involved. Why are you giving us this? Noah asked, suspicious. Because I'm dying, and because you deserve to choose what kind of legacy you want to carry. Richard looked at his two sons. You can use this to do justice, or you can bury it all and rebuild the Montgomery name in a different way. The choice is yours. The silence that followed was heavy with the weight of the decision they would have to make. In the garden, night had fallen completely over Savannah, and with it, the future of the Montgomery family hung by a thread, waiting for the moment when the truth would finally come out. The flash drive weighed like lead in Sophia's hands as she and Noah left the Montgomery mansion that night. The humid Savannah air felt stifling, heavy with the weight of the revelations and decisions they would have to make. I can't go back to Walterboro tonight, Noah said, running his hands over his tired face. I need to process all of this. You can stay at my apartment, Sophia offered automatically, then realized how awkward the situation was. I mean on the sofa? Thanks, Noah replied, a small sad smile appearing on his lips. It's funny how a week ago we were preparing for a wedding and now… Please don't finish that sentence, Sophia interrupted, shuddering. In Sophia's apartment in Forsyth Park, the two of them sat on the balcony with cups of strong coffee, the USB stick between them on the wrought iron table. The park was silent at that hour, only a few fireflies dancing among the century-old trees. Do you think he was lying? Noah finally asked. About not knowing about Clara's pregnancy? Sophia considered the question for a moment. Honestly, no. I saw his face when he read her letter. That pain was real. But that doesn't erase everything he did. No, it doesn't. Sophia picked up the flash drive, twirling it between her fingers. What do we do with it? If we hand it over to the police, we destroy not only him, but the whole family. And if we don't, we become accomplices, Noah added. Sophia's cell phone vibrated. It was a message from Eleanor. Your father had a crisis. We're at Memorial Health University Medical Center. 20 minutes later, Sophia and Noah were walking through the aseptic corridors of the hospital. They found Eleanor sitting on a plastic chair in the ICU waiting area, looking smaller and more fragile than ever. The doctors say the cancer has spread faster than they expected, she informed them, her voice breaking. It could be days, not months. Noah turned away, leaning against the nearest wall. All his life he had imagined the moment when he would confront his biological father, but now that he was losing Richard before he had even really met him, the pain was surprisingly intense. Mrs. Montgomery, a nurse, appeared at the door. "Your husband is asking about Noah." Eleanor and Sophia looked at Noah, who seemed frozen in place. After a few seconds of hesitation, he nodded and followed the nurse. Richard was connected to several monitors, his skin sallow and his eyes deep. Still, when he saw Noah, he tried to sit up straighter in bed. "Son," he said, his voice no more than a whisper. "Why did you call me here?" Noah asked, keeping his distance. "Because I need you to understand something." Richard paused to cough. "When I met Clara, I was a different man. Younger, more arrogant, more dangerous. But she changed me. She made me want to be better. So why did you let her go?" "Because I was too cowardly to face the consequences of my actions. When she disappeared, I plunged even deeper into shady dealings, as if I could fill the void she left with power and money." Richard extended a trembling hand towards Noah. "But seeing you now, I see so much of her in you. The same strength, the same integrity." Noah hesitated before stepping forward, allowing Richard to take his hand. "I'm not asking for forgiveness," Richard continued. "I don't deserve it, but I want you and Sophia to use that information to do the right thing. Clear the Montgomery name not by burying the secrets, but by exposing them and rebuilding something new from the ashes." "Why now?" Noah asked, his voice trembling. "Why this change of heart?" "Because death has an interesting way of putting everything into perspective." Richard smiled sadly. "And because I can finally see clearly the legacy I want to leave through my children." In the hallway, Sophia hugged Eleanor, who was finally letting the tears fall freely. "He wasn't always like this, you know," Eleanor whispered. "In the beginning, Richard was an idealistic man. He wanted to make a difference in the world. At some point, power corrupted him. How did you stand it, Mom? All the lies, all the secrets. Because I loved him, and because I learned that sometimes we love not the person someone is, but who they could have been." When Noah came out of his room an hour later, his eyes were red, but there was a new determination on his face. "Let's do this," he said to Sophia. "Let's expose everything. Are you sure?" "Yes, but our way. Not to destroy, but to rebuild." In the days that followed, as Richard struggled with the last hours of his life, Noah and Sophia worked tirelessly, analyzing every document, every transaction. With the help of a trusted lawyer, they began to map out a plan to gradually expose the illegal operations, allowing the legitimate companies to be preserved and restructured. A week after the confrontation in the office, Richard Montgomery died in the early hours of the morning, holding Eleanor's hands. His last request was to be buried next to Clara Matthews' grave in Augusta. At the funeral, under the gray Savannah sky, Noah and Sophia stood side by side, no longer as strangers forced into an arranged marriage, but as siblings united by a story of pain and, perhaps, redemption. "You know what's weird?" Sophia said softly. "Despite everything, I still love him." "Me too," Noah admitted. "And maybe that's what makes us different from him. The ability to love even when it hurts, even when it's complicated." Eleanor approached them, carrying an old box. "I found these in his office. They're letters that Clara wrote but never sent. I think you should read them together." Noah took the box, feeling the weight of more secrets, more truths to be discovered. But this time, he wasn't alone. He had a sister by his side, and together, they could face whatever revelations those yellowed pages held. Sophia's apartment in Forsyth Park became a makeshift sanctuary in the days following Richard's funeral. Clara's box of letters remained on the coffee table, a silent presence that was impossible to ignore. Noah had briefly returned to Walterboro to organize the farm, leaving a temporary manager in charge, and now divided his time between the estate and Savannah. "Do you want to start?" Sophia asked, pouring 2 cups of tea as she watched Noah stare at the box as if it might explode at any moment. "I don't know if I'm ready," he admitted, running his fingers over the dusty lid. "It's like it makes everything even more real." Eleanor had temporarily moved into Sophia's guest apartment. Unable to bear the loneliness of the Montgomery mansion, She entered the room at that moment, carrying a tray of homemade cookies in an attempt to find comfort in the small normalities of life. The first letter is dated March 1990. Noah began, finally opening the box. His voice trembled slightly as he read, "Dear Richard, today I found out that I'm pregnant. My first reaction was fear not of the baby, but of the world into which it will be born. A world where your father is involved in things I can no longer pretend not to see. The documents I found, the people you hurt, how can I bring a child into this? Still, I feel an inexplicable joy. There's a life growing inside me, a life we created together in the moments when you were just Richard, not the powerful Mr. Montgomery. Those rare moments when your eyes would soften and you would talk about your youthful dreams. Please prove me wrong. Prove that the man I love still exists beneath all these layers of power and ambition. Love, Clara." Sophia wiped away a tear that ran down her cheek. She really loved him. "And he loved her too," Eleanor said softly. For the last few days, he kept repeating her name. Noah picked up another letter, this one stained with what looked like old tears. "Richard, Rose told me today that you've been looking for me, that you've offered a substantial reward for information about my whereabouts. Part of me wants to run back to you, tell you about our son, give him the chance to meet his father. But then I remember the threats, the looks from your associates, the constant fear. Noah, yes, I named our son as growing up strong and healthy. He has your eyes, you know, and that way of tilting his head when he's thinking. The Andersons are wonderful with him. Sometimes I wonder if I'm being selfish by depriving him of his real family, but then I remember that family goes far beyond blood. Eternally yours, Clara." She was thinking of you. Sophia touched Noah's arm gently. Every decision she made was out of love. But at what cost? Noah stood up, walking over to the window. Night had fallen over Savannah, and the lights from the park created dancing shadows on the walls of the apartment. All my life I felt that something was missing, that there was a void that not even the Andersons could completely fill. Eleanor approached him, hesitantly. "Noah, there's something I need to tell you. Over the last few days, Richard confessed to me that he'd always known where Clara was." Noah turned around abruptly. "What?" "He found her a few years after she left. But seeing how happy you were with the Andersons, how Clara had built a secure life away from him, he decided not to interfere. How could he?" Noah punched the wall lightly. "How could he watch us from afar all these years and say nothing? Because he knew that his presence in your lives would only bring danger," Eleanor explained. "The men he did business with, they weren't the type to forgive betrayals." Sophia reached for the flash drive she still carried with her. "That's why we need to do this right. We can't just expose everything at once. We need to be strategic." "I agree." Noah took a deep breath, sitting back down. "But first, we need to finish these letters. We need to understand the whole story." The next few hours were spent reading every letter, every word that Clara had written over the years. There were accounts of Noah's first steps, his first words, his successes at school. There were also warnings about the criminal activities she had uncovered, names, dates, places, information that, combined with the contents of the USB stick, formed a complete picture of the extent of Richard Montgomery's crimes. The last letter, Noah held up the envelope dated just 6 months before Clara's death, is addressed to me. Silence filled the room as he read aloud. "My dear son, if you are reading this, it means that all the truths have finally come out. I want you to know that there has never been a day when I didn't think of you, when I didn't wonder if I had made the right decision. The Andersons gave you the love and stability that I could never have provided while I was on the run. But you also carry within you the strength of the Montgomerys, not the strength that comes from power and money, but the strength that comes from the heart. Forgive your father, not for him, but for yourself. And remember, you are more than your blood, more than your genes. You are all the choices you have made, all the good you have brought into the world with your own hands. With eternal love, your mother, Clara." By the time Noah had finished reading, large silent tears were streaming down his face. Sophia hugged him, and for the first time since they discovered their true relationship, the embrace carried no awkwardness. It was just the comfort between siblings who shared a deep pain. Eleanor watched her children, amazed at how fate had woven that complex tapestry of love, pain, and redemption. In the midst of tragedy, something beautiful had emerged. A family rebuilt on foundations of truth, no longer secrets. 2 weeks after reading Clara's letters, the Wilson & Associates law firm in downtown Savannah was buzzing with activity. Sophia and Noah had hired Jessica Wilson, a lawyer specializing in corporate crime, to help them navigate the maze of evidence Richard had left behind. "What we have here is explosive," Jessica explained, spreading out documents on her mahogany desk. "But we also have a unique opportunity to do things the right way." Noah, who had just arrived from Walterboro, still wearing his farm work clothes, leaned over the papers. "What do you mean?" "Most of the people involved in the schemes are still in positions of power," Jessica continued. "But you have something they didn't expect: time and planning." Sophia typed furiously on her laptop, organizing the information into a timeline. "Some of these documents show transactions from up to 3 decades ago. How can we use this without looking like we're just out for revenge?" "Starting with the present," Eleanor suggested, surprising everyone with her entrance into the room. She was carrying an old folder. "I found these in Richard's personal safe. These are recent records of people who are still actively involved in illegal activities." Jessica took the folder, her eyes widening as she examined its contents. "That changes everything. With this information, we can start an investigation focused on current crimes, without necessarily exposing the entire history at once." "What about the farm?" Noah asked, his concern evident. "The investments Richard made, I've already taken care of that," Eleanor replied. "I've transferred all the shares into your name, legally. The farm is yours, Noah, free of any connection to illicit activities." Noah felt a lump in his throat. It was the first time Eleanor had taken such a direct stance in recognizing him as part of the family. "Thank you," he managed to say. "There's one more thing," Eleanor continued, her voice trembling slightly. "Richard left a bank account in the Cayman Islands in Clara's name. Apparently, he deposited money into it regularly, even though he knew she would never use it. All this time," Sophia murmured, "he was trying, in his own twisted way, to do the right thing." Jessica snorted, bringing everyone back to the present moment. "We need to establish a clear plan of action. I suggest we start with the Montgomery Enterprises board members who are still actively involved in money laundering." The next few hours were spent mapping out a meticulous strategy. Martha, who had become an invaluable ally, provided crucial details about old conversations and meetings she had witnessed over the years. "The most important thing," Jessica emphasized, "is to protect the company's innocent employees. We can't let them pay for the executive's crimes." "I agree," Noah said, getting up to stretch his legs. "The farm employs dozens of local families. I've seen up close how corporate decisions can affect real people." Sophia watched her brother with a new respect. In recent weeks, she had discovered in him a moral strength that she deeply admired. "We could use some of the money from Clara's account to set up a protection fund for employees during the transition." Eleanor smiled, proud to see her children working together to right the wrongs of the past. "Richard would be proud of you both." "Really?" Noah asked, a hint of bitterness in his voice. "The man who built an empire based on lies? The man who, in the end, chose to give you the tools to do the right thing," Eleanor replied softly. "Complex people can make terrible decisions and still want something better for their children." Jessica began organizing the documents into separate piles. "We'll need at least 3 months to implement all of this. First, we'll present the evidence to the FBI, but only that related to the current crimes. Then we'll work on restructuring the company." "What about the press?" Sophia asked, her experience in photography giving her a unique perspective on how the media could distort the story. "We control the narrative," Jessica replied firmly. "You two will be seen as the heirs who chose to expose corruption and save the company, not destroy it." As the meeting continued, the sun began to set over Savannah, painting the sky with shades of orange and pink that were reflected in the office windows. Noah found himself thinking about Clara, how she had sacrificed everything to protect him, and how now he had the chance to honor her memory by doing the right thing. "You know," he said to Sophia as they left the office hours later, "I never thought I'd say this, but I'm glad to be a Montgomery, not because of the name or the money, but because it means I can help put things right. Sophia entwined her arm in his, a gesture that had become natural in recent weeks. We're stronger together. Clara knew that, even if she couldn't see us growing up side by side. Eleanor watched them from afar, her heart filled with a mixture of sadness and hope. Richard Montgomery's legacy would be transformed not through power and intimidation, but through the love and courage of his children. 3 months after the meeting in Jessica Wilson's office, the headquarters of Montgomery Enterprises was buzzing with activity. The first reports had been made to the FBI in a controlled manner, and the press was already beginning to report on a historic restructuring at the century-old Savannah Company. Sophia watched from the window of her new office on the 15th floor as reporters flocked to the building's entrance. As the new interim CEO, a position she reluctantly assumed after intense family debate, she now carried the weight of transforming the Montgomerys' tarnished legacy into something she could be proud of. "Are you ready?" Noah asked, entering the room. He had just arrived from Walterboro, where his farm now served as a model of sustainable agriculture and ethical labor practices. "I'll never be totally ready," Sophia replied, adjusting her navy blazer, "but it's the right thing to do." The press conference they would hold that morning would mark the official start of the new Montgomery era. Jessica had meticulously orchestrated every detail, ensuring that the narrative focused on the heirs' courage in exposing corruption and their dedication to protecting innocent employees. Eleanor entered the room, carrying an old box. "I found this morning, while I was finalizing the move from the mansion." Inside the box was a framed photo of Clara Matthews in her office at Montgomery Enterprises, smiling radiantly at the camera. Next to her, a young Richard Montgomery looked genuinely happy. "She deserved better," Noah said softly, touching the glass of the frame. "We all deserved it," Eleanor replied. "But now we have the chance to make it different." The company auditorium was packed when Sophia and Noah took to the stage. Cameras flashed and reporters jostled, eager for the story that promised to shake up the southern business scene. "Good morning," Sophia began, her voice firm on the microphone. "We are here today not only as the heirs of Montgomery Enterprises, but as people committed to truth and justice." Noah stepped forward. "In recent weeks, we have worked in cooperation with federal authorities to expose criminal practices that have tarnished not only our family name, but affected countless innocent lives." The presentation that followed was meticulous. Sophia and Noah detailed the measures they were taking: the Employee Protection Fund, created with the money from Clara's account, the complete restructuring of the board of directors, the new compliance and transparency procedures. "But beyond the corporate changes," Sophia continued, her voice softening, "this is a story about family, about second chances and redemption." It was then that Noah revealed his true identity publicly for the first time. The buzz that ran through the auditorium was instantaneous, but he kept his composure. "I am the son of Clara Matthews and Richard Montgomery," he declared. "My existence has been kept secret for decades, part of a web of lies that is finally being unraveled. But out of this pain, out of this truth, something new has been born, a chance to make a difference." After the press conference, while the reporters dispersed and the staff processed the bombshell revelations, Sophia, Noah, and Eleanor gathered in Richard's old office. "He'd be proud," Eleanor said, watching her children, "not of the man he was, but of the legacy you are building." "We still have a lot of work to do," Sophia sighed, looking at the piles of documents on her desk. "The investigations continue, and some of the former business partners aren't going down without a fight. But we're not alone anymore," Noah added, a small smile on his lips. "It's funny how life works, isn't it? 6 months ago, we were strangers being forced into an arranged marriage. And now we're a real family," Sophia added, returning the smile. Martha entered the room carrying a tray of coffee. "Miss Sophia, Mr. Noah, Miss Wilson is on the line. She says the FBI have made their first arrests." The news was greeted with a mixture of relief and apprehension. It was only the beginning of a long journey of recovery and rebuilding. That evening, after an exhausting day, Noah drove to the cemetery in Augusta where Clara was buried. Sophia insisted on accompanying him, and together they placed fresh flowers on her mother's grave. "Do you know what impresses me the most?" Sophia said, as they watched the sunset tint the Georgia sky. How love can survive so much pain. Clara never stopped loving Dad, even after everything. And somehow, that love has brought us here. Noah hugged his sister, feeling for the first time in his life that he really belonged somewhere. She knew this day would come. In her letters, she always talked about truth and redemption. And now it's up to us to honor that legacy, Sophia replied. Not the Montgomery legacy of power and money, but Clara's legacy, love, courage, and truth. As they left the cemetery, Noah took one last look at his mother's grave. The soft Georgia wind swayed the flowers they had left, and for a moment, he could have sworn he felt her presence, not with sadness or regret, but with peace. The future was still uncertain, with many challenges ahead. But Noah and Sophia Montgomery now knew that they could face anything together, strengthened not only by blood ties, but by the conscious choice to transform a history of secrets and lies into a new beginning based on truth and redemption.